Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Andrew Kirchhoff, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, we're going to be talking about my Week 8 quarterback starter sets for the 2019 fantasy football season. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about the quarterback position, the matchups at the quarterback position as we enter Week 8, and then talking about my top 16 quarterback rankings on the week. Before we begin today's video, let me remind all of you, if you haven't yet already, click that subscribe button, join the community, click that bell notification button to be staying up to date on my latest content as it comes out, and also do not forget to click the like button on today's video. Hello everybody, how's everybody doing? Hope everyone's doing well on this beautiful Thursday. Thursday Night Football is just underway. Tonight we have the Washington Redskins playing against the Minnesota Vikings. Should be fun. I think it'll be a one-sided matchup, but either way, for those of you who have pieces on that Minnesota Vikings offense, whether it's Kirk Cousins, Stephon Diggs, Dalvin Cook, that should be pretty exciting in terms of fantasy relevance and them having some pretty good performances today. But we're here to talk about the quarterback position. We're talking about my Week 8 rankings, etc. Like we usually do, I talk about some news. Obviously, there are some, couple key players before Friday. They still haven't practiced. We haven't seen Devontae Adams practice fully. He came out, he did some stretching, went back in, and continued to do rehab similar to Patrick Mahomes yesterday. We haven't seen Matt Ryan do much, but if he does end up playing, we'll talk about him in a little bit. There are other players that, as of right now, are questionable, but we will get a great indication of whether or not they are going to play on Friday. So we are going to wait until then, and once in fact we do get that information coming forth and whether or not they are going to play, somebody like Alvin Kamara, maybe David Johnson, once we get that confirmation of whether or not they are going to play, then we can go ahead and prepare for the week, and then you guys can show up on Sunday morning, 8:30 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, where I'll be doing my live stream here. I'll have updated rankings for every position like I typically do, and we'll get underway. So anyway, let's go ahead and talk about quarterbacks. Let's talk about the matchups for Week 8 of the 2019 fantasy football season. As we usually know, the Miami Dolphins give up a lot of points to opposing quarterbacks. That is no surprise. They get to take on the Pittsburgh Steelers. Mason Rudolph could be a sleeper play. Also, for those of you who haven't already checked out, I have a quarterback rest of season schedule. I have rest of season schedule for episode for the quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and tight end position already done. I finished those last week. For those of you who are interested, go check out Mason Rudolph's schedule. It's actually quite promising, and if he can actually gain some momentum going forward after this bye week, stay healthy, he could be a pretty decent quarterback in the coming weeks, especially considering the matchup of Miami. Not a bad option. Moving on, the Atlanta Falcons cannot stop anybody defensively. Neither can the Raiders. Neither can the Cardinals. Surprisingly, the Houston Texans have not been great all season long. This past week, Jacoby Brissett completely destroyed them, and going forward, even though they played better against Patrick Mahomes, they still gave up a pretty decent amount of points, so they are definitely not immune to getting a couple touchdowns dropped on them. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers always struggling defensively, especially in the secondary. The Cincinnati Bengals, the Detroit Lions, the Cleveland Browns, and the New Orleans Saints, all teams that have struggled against the quarterback thus far through the first 7 weeks of the season against opposing quarterbacks in 6-point per passing touchdown formats. And then if we go and check the tougher matchups, the Titans get to take on Jameis Winston, and the Jets get to take on what's his name? Goodness gracious, Gardner Minshew. We have the Carolina Panthers, the Packers, the Bears, the Cowboys, the Bills, the Broncos, the 49ers, and the Patriots. As we all should know, the Ravens and the Cowboys are on bye week, so go ahead and take those guys out. There will be no Dak Prescott. There will be no Lamar Jackson on today's list, as there typically is, because those two guys are typically top 8 quarterbacks every single week, and they've been fantastic thus far. So hopefully we can go ahead and find you some relevant plays this week as a streaming quarterback, because as the weeks go on and the bye week hells and the bye-apocalypse begin, it's really important to go ahead and lock down some streaming quarterbacks that can help you win the week. So anyway, this was to kind of give you some perspective on how many points defenses are giving to opposing quarterbacks on a weekly basis on average. So without further ado, let's go ahead and talk about my top 16 quarterback rankings, starting with my top 8 on the week. Starting off with number 1, again, before we begin, rankings are always subject to change. Again, by Sunday morning, these rankings will be different. It will not include, Kirk Cousins because he plays on Thursday. But again, remember that rankings are always subject to change. There are always an ever-changing injury report, or one player going down could make a huge difference in a specific quarterback's week. But anyway, just to kind of take into account, just so everyone's on the same page. All right, starting off with number 1, Deshaun Watson. Okay, so Deshaun Watson did struggle last week, surely. He's been a pretty good quarterback all season long. He's either been a huge boom play or typically he's busted at some times, especially last week. Wasn't great against the Indianapolis Colts, but he was okay. Right? He didn't kill your team, but he definitely could have put forth a better effort and better performance. Now that we're going into this matchup and we're playing against the Raiders, coming off of the week, last week the Raiders got 6 touchdowns dropped on them by Aaron Rodgers alone. So just thinking of what the capabilities are for Deshaun Watson going into this matchup, and thinking about how bad that that Raiders defense has been in the last couple weeks, besides giving up 5 passing touchdowns to Aaron Rodgers. The week before that in London, or a couple weeks before that in London against Chase Daniels had 2 passing touchdowns. And then the week before that, Jacoby Brissett had 3 passing touchdowns. So this defense has been trending towards a spot to where obviously their secondary has been beat up early in the season, and it's not looking good. And there's a lot of teams that are taking advantage of that and being able to put up a lot of points against this Raiders defense. I personally believe, yes, the absence of Will Fuller will ultimately hurt this offense a tad bit, but truly, as long as DeAndre Hopkins is getting more implemented in this offense, I believe the offense as a whole is better. And hopefully we're going to see that this week. Deshaun Watson is my number one. His ability to run the ball, his ability to use his arm, throw on the run. The offensive line play needs to get better. But ultimately, I think Deshaun Watson is the number one of the week. With Patrick Mahomes out, with Lamar Jackson out, with Dak out, this is the number one. All right, moving on to number 2, Russell Wilson. Okay, Russell Wilson, I talked about him last week, and I talked about him like he's the best quarterback in the league right now. He hasn't thrown an interception. Little did I know, I was jinxing just about every quarterback last week. He threw his first interception of the season. Sure, he may have 18 total touchdowns on the year through the air and on the ground. But that being said, there's always the struggles that some quarterbacks hit. Surprisingly, it was against that Ravens defense, which unfortunately was the case even at home. But going into this week's matchup, Russell Wilson will be taking on the Atlanta Falcons. And I say it every week, the Atlanta Falcons cannot stop a soul on defense. They are really just not, they're not capable of doing it. Whether it's personnel issues, whether it's coaching, whether it's just straight talent, they cannot stop opposing offenses from scoring as much as they like at will. And we saw that last week. A struggling Rams team on a 3-game slide came in and dropped 37 points on this defense. I mean, that is all I need to hear. Russell Wilson going forward, especially in this week, should be fine. If we want to talk about what the Atlanta Falcons have given up, let's talk about it in the last couple weeks. Since week 3, to Jacoby Brissett, 2 touchdowns. Then the following weeks, 3 passing touchdowns, 5 passing touchdowns, 3 passing touchdowns, and 2 passing touchdowns. Every single week since week 3, they've given up 2+ passing touchdowns to opposing quarterbacks, and it's only getting worse as this team continues to slide in the completely opposite direction. If, in fact, Matt Ryan doesn't play this week, it's no good, and it's all Russell Wilson all day long. He's my number 2 on the week. Moving on to number 3, Aaron Rodgers, having his biggest performance in maybe, it was an incredible game to say the least, right? Pretty back and forth, and it was great that the Raiders were able to move the ball and effectively score. But at the end of the day, it was all Aaron Rodgers all day long in Lambeau, which really isn't a surprise. But now you're going against the Kansas City Chiefs defense, and I personally believe this is only going to help Rodgers. Now that he's continuing to gain momentum. This team is 6-1. The consistency is there. You're producing at this level. Aaron Rodgers is producing at this level without Davante Adams. Davante Adams was the only receiver last season that was capable of doing anything in this offense. Now that we've kind of taken his safety blanket away and have to force other pieces to get involved. Aaron Jones in the passing game, Jamal Williams in the passing game, Jimmy Graham has more of a role, Marquez Valdez-Scantling, all of these other, Allison, Kumaro, Lazard. There are so many pieces here that he is utilizing to make this offense move. And I think going forward into this matchup, especially with Matt Moore at quarterback on the opposite side of the ball, or on the opposite team, I think Aaron Rodgers is good to go against the Kansas City Chiefs. We've seen a lot of teams, put a fancy number on the Kansas City Chiefs. Obviously, Joe Flacco isn't one of them, but still, I truly do believe that there is a good chance that Aaron Rodgers going forward in this matchup should be good. So let's go ahead and see it. Obviously, a lot of teams like to run the ball heavily against the Chiefs, which kind of decreases the value of opposing quarterbacks, but I think Aaron Rodgers will be fine. All right, moving on to number 4, Jared Goff. Had a fantastic matchup against the Atlanta Falcons, did exactly what he was supposed to do. 2 touchdowns on the through the air, 1 on the ground, perfectly fine. That's exactly what we want to see. And then now you get to play against the Bengals in London. The Bengals are 0-7, and they are in shambles. This team, cannot play defense, only wants to throw the ball offensively, and does so somewhat effectively. Even though Andy Dalton throws interceptions, they're able to somewhat get back into games by just late garbage time. So either way, I think this is going to be a game in which Jared Goff is scoring 3+ touchdowns, maintaining a lead, and then in the second half, this team is going to kill the clock by running the ball with Darrell Henderson. If in fact there is a possibility in which the Bengals want to stay competitive, that's even better. It'll keep Jared Goff in the game, throwing the ball more, and only inherently give him more value. Either way, he's my number 4 against the Bengals, a team that, yikes. I mean, just looking at the Bengals in general. Let me see here. The Cincinnati Bengals in the last couple weeks to opposing quarterbacks really hasn't given up much. Like Lamar Jackson just ran all over them, right? Kyler Murray ran all over them. They didn't have to throw passing touchdowns. So a lot of the teams just all they have to do is run the ball. Todd Gurley isn't in the, physical shape, considering he's coming off that quad contusion, and he's always got that knee injury looming. I don't think this is going to be we're going to run the ball over them. I think this is going to be more of we're going to air it out and let Jared Goff take care of it. That's why he's my number 4. Moving on to number 5, Thursday night matchup against this former team. Kirk Cousins has been on fire. Kirk Cousins has jumped leaps and bounds in the last couple weeks. I mean, it is ridiculous how much improvement we've seen from a guy that, I was literally saying, Kirk Cousins, you are one of the worst quarterbacks in the league, because he truly was to an extent. Through the first 3 weeks of the season, he wasn't doing anything. The guy, literally, through the first 3 weeks of the season, only threw 3 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. That's not, and against Chicago, 0 touchdowns, 0 interceptions. Since then, the guy has been, substantially better. 4 touchdowns in each of the last 2 games apiece. The guy is murking it through the air, and that's exactly what we want to see. Unfortunately, there is no Adam Thielen this Thursday. Olabisi Johnson's going to be out there. They're going to have the combination of Irv Smith and Kyle Rudolph, Stephon Diggs as usual, and Dalvin Cook out of the backfield. I still find, Kirk Cousins having himself a pretty good game here, especially against the secondary of the Washington Redskins that have been so awful all season long. Talking about how much points they've given up. They've given up 3+ touchdowns to 4 separate quarterbacks thus far this season. And they're a defense that truly, except for last week, obviously because of the weather game, Jimmy Garoppolo could not do anything. And the week before that, where it was Ryan Fitzpatrick and Josh Rosen pretty much splitting snaps, which was a joke. The rest of the season, they've been very, porous against defenses. And the Washington Redskins, they're going to have a handful tonight. That's why I have Kirk Cousins as my number 5 spot. Moving on to number 6. So Matt Ryan didn't practice again today with that ankle injury. I want to hope that Matt Ryan does play. And if he does, he's gonna sit on my number 6 spot this week, because playing against the Seattle Seahawks is not that difficult of a task, in my opinion. And I think Matt Ryan, if he is up for it and he's healthy to go, I think he's going to be able to produce on the given matchup on the given week. Now, unfortunately, there's a chance that he doesn't play. If he doesn't play, well, we're going to have to take into account that Matt Schaub will be his replacement, and every offensive piece surrounding him will lose, their basic value for the week. But hopefully he's going to play. If he does, I like the matchup against Seattle. I think overall, this team, sure, they want to win a game, but the future of the organization is more important, so they might keep Ryan out. But if he does play again, I want him as my number 6 quarterback. All right, moving on to number 7, Matthew Stafford. All right, Matthew Stafford, you get to play against the Giants. The Giants cannot play defense. They are one of those teams that cannot stop a soul defensively. We saw that last week with Chase Edmonds running all over them. Even though the Detroit Lions have lost the last 2 games against divisional matchups, they have not played bad at all. Monday night against the Green Bay Packers, that offense played fantastically. A couple, no calls or bogus calls went the opposite direction, ended up losing the game. But Matthew Stafford played well in that game. And then this past week against the Minnesota Vikings, a very competitive team. Sure, their defense was giving up a lot of points, but Matthew Stafford completed 4 touchdown passes to 1 receiver. The guy is lighting it up through the air. Matthew Stafford has put up so many points comparatively last season. And I've been saying this since early summer. A lot of people are down on Matthew Stafford because, he didn't perform well last year. Guys, it's because Golden Tate was traded. Marvin Jones went down with an injury. Kerryon Johnson went down with an injury. And he had his back injury that in itself was, and then they had the coaching change. You had all that noise. All of that affected Matthew Stafford. You can't just go from being a top 8 quarterback in fantasy every year to being a number 26 quarterback and people think, oh, you know what, that's just natural regression. That isn't the case. Matthew Stafford is one of the gunslingers in this league, and that's why he's been thus far so good, and he's going to continue to be great. He's got number 7 on the week against the Giants defense that can't stop anybody. All right, moving on. Josh Allen plays against the Eagles. Against the Eagles, the Eagles give up the most points to opposing wide receivers. Not a surprise. Him and John Brown are going to be fantastic with one another. And I think this offense, even though they did struggle against Miami, which is very concerning, I think this is one of those flaccid 5-1 teams like I talked about earlier in the week. But again, Josh Allen probably has a very good potential of scoring high numbers because of his ability to move his legs, find open receivers, and play against, subpar defenses and be able to score a decent amount of points. As of right now, my number 8 spot, pretty safe for him. That's where he'll sit and lie. All right, moving on. Let's talk about my 9 through 16. Let's finish off strong here. Talking about these guys. Starting off with number 9, Tom Brady. All right, Tom Brady. Sometimes you'll score 2 rushing touchdowns. Sometimes you'll hand off 3 rushing touchdowns to Sony Michel. We don't know exactly where Tom Brady's going to lie, but I do believe that there is a better chance of him having a 2-touchdown game this week. Going forward, it's a pretty easy matchup against the Cleveland Browns. The Cleveland Browns have struggled all season long. If, in fact, the defense of the Patriots can continue to produce as they have thus far this season, it is going to only help Tom Brady. Obviously, we're going to have to wait for probably a week or so until Mohamed Sanu is fully implemented in this offense, but they don't need him right away. Jacoby Myers and Philip Dorsett have both played very well on the outsides. Julian Edelman is as consistent as he has been all season long in the slot. You have James White, who has the most targets amongst all receiving options thus far this season. That is correct. He has 11 red zone targets, more than anybody else in the NFL with 10 receptions. Pretty impressive in my opinion. And then you have the plethora of other pieces that they rotated, Brandon Bolden, Sony Michel, etc. So as of right now, Tom Brady, number 9, pretty safe spot for him, a top 12 for certain. I just couldn't put him in that top 8 echelon because sometimes, winning does not require Tom Brady to have to throw the ball. Defense scores, special team scores, running the ball scores, and Tom Brady becomes, the afterthought in that offense because all they want to do is win. And they don't really need him to have to throw for 3 touchdowns for them to win every game, similar to other quarterbacks that have to score so often because their defenses are struggling. All right, moving on. Let's talk about my number 10, Jacoby Brissett. Jacoby's been fantastic this year. Filling in for Andrew Luck, he's been incredible. Last week had a very big performance. The last 2 weeks that he's played, sure, against the Kansas City Chiefs wasn't great. That's a given. But I do believe going forward, playing against Houston, played pretty well against them, a division rival. This is a team that's 4-2 right now, and they're trending in the right direction. Honestly, as of right now, in the matchup against Denver, it could be seen as a tougher matchup. I personally don't think it's going to be too difficult for this team. I think the Indianapolis Colts as a team, as an entire franchise, they have so many weapons to feed. Now that you're getting Zach Pascal more involved, you're getting Eric Ebron more involved in this offense, you're going to see more and more production from this offense as a whole, and it's only going to help going forward. As of right now, he's one of the best in the league, in one of the better offenses. He's my number 10. All right, moving on. Let's talk about number 11, Jameis Winston. So Winston, sure, it wasn't, it was a couple weeks ago where he threw 5 interceptions and looked worse. He didn't look worse than Sam Darnold. Sam Darnold looked probably the worst quarterback in the league right now after that performance. But Jameis Winston is one of the better guys. He has 2 stud wide receivers. O.J. Howard didn't practice this week, so for those of you looking for a tight end, maybe Cameron Brate's an option. But overall, I think there is a good opportunity for Jameis Winston to get back on his horse and take this team in the right direction. I think there is a possibility that this defense of the Tennessee Titans does force him to struggle a little bit, but I still do think that this is a guy that even with all of the interceptions he throws and all the turnovers that he forces, he has a lot of inherent value because he always comes back out and puts up points with touchdowns in garbage time. So as a top 12 prospect as my number 11, I'm perfectly comfortable with Jameis. Moving on to number 12, Teddy Bridgewater. All right, Teddy. You get to play against the Cardinals. You've been playing very good thus far this season. I have heard a little bit of rumblings that potentially Drew Brees could be a game-time decision this week. I don't think that he is going to for sure play this week, But I do think that Teddy Bridgewater is going to get the start. They're not going to have to force Drew Brees back. I think they might bring him back after their bye week just to kind of clean the slate there. As of right now, Teddy Bridgewater has been incredible. He's going to continue to play well, especially against this Cardinals defense this week. As my number 12 option, I have pretty good confidence in him as a streaming option this week. He's my number 12. Moving on to number 13, Ryan Tannehill. All right. Even though Ryan Tannehill, sure, it may have been a one-week wonder. Maybe that Chargers matchup was far too easy. Maybe, everything just panned out the right way, and we're just gassing him up a little too much. But I personally think because of the matchup against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, a defense that has given up the second most passing yards to opposing offenses thus far this season, and a lot of receiving touchdowns to opposing wide receivers, I do think that Ryan Tannehill is going to have a pretty decent opportunity this week to put together a good performance against this defense. Tannehill, even though he has not seen too much exposure thus far this season, is more of a hitting guy, can be a waiver wire pickup and streaming option this week because this offense really has looked better. They looked far better last week, even though it looked like they weren't able to get away with too many points. That's just how this offense works. They are slow, they are methodical, but once they get down there in the red zone, Ryan Tannehill, pretty good. He's my number 13. All right, moving on to number 14, Carson Wentz. Carson Wentz has been better. He's definitely been better. That matchup last week was tough. And I do believe that Carson Wentz is a better quarterback, and he's going to show that this week. I think this might be a higher scoring event than a lot of other people may assume. The Buffalo defense has a couple gaps in there. I mean, when Ryan Fitzpatrick is able to evade sacks and make plays on a consistent basis there in the second half, it leads me to believe that, Carson Wentz, as kind of shaky as he's been thus far this season, has a very good potential to score points and be a relevant fantasy option this week. For those of you who are owners of Carson Wentz, excuse me, I keep going with Ryan because I keep looking at it, of Carson Wentz, you'll know, 2 touchdowns is what we want, and that's what I'm expecting. I'm expecting a 2-touchdown game from him. He should be good. He's my number 14. Moving on to 15, Gardner Minshew. All right, we got a rookie quarterback here. I think Gardner Minshew against the Jets, in my opinion, it's a no-brainer at this point. After how bad the Jets were as an entire organization this past week, sure, they're going to come out better, but I do think that Gardner Minshew has been one of the more consistent quarterbacks in the NFL in terms of passing the ball, in terms of, not really forcing too many turnovers here and there. Maybe he fumbles a couple times, but through the air has been pretty good. I think from what I saw from him last week, being able to spread the ball, not have to feed the ball to Chark and be able to spread it to D.D. Westbrook, Chris Conley, Fournette consistently playing on the ground. This team is continuing to get better week by week, and I think Gardner Minshew has a pretty good chance this week against the Jets defense that has not been great to have himself a good week. He's number 15. My last option here, Kyler Murray, coming off a awful week, mainly because they never needed to use his arm to win that game. Chase Edmonds wholeheartedly dominated that game. I think, with 66%, passing completion last week, only 104 passing yards, it's pretty grim. You may be thinking, do I really want to start this guy? I personally do, because the 2 weeks prior, the guy was able to make plays with either his arm or his legs. Now, I understand the Saints defense is no joke, and there's probably going to be an opportunity for the Saints defense to really get after him and potentially force some turnovers. But Kyler Murray is a better quarterback when he is on the run, when he has to force to make plays with his legs, because the guy thus far this season, I got to find this, shall we? Thus far this season has made a lot of plays and has gained a lot of yards with his legs that a lot of people just kind of look past. I mean, thus far this season, especially as of late, 28 rushing yards, 32 rushing yards, 93 rushing yards, 27 rushing yards, 69 rushing yards. And in those games, he's had 2 rushing touchdowns in, 2 of the last 5 games. The guy's been pretty good on the ground. On top of the fact that he's playing against a defense that has struggled in the secondary, if Christian Kirk can come back, this offense can spread out and not have to force running the ball because it's going to be difficult. I think Kyler Murray could have value. That's why he sits at 16. He's that fringe play at the moment with a better opportunity than some of these other quarterbacks. But that's pretty much it. I want to thank everybody for watching. I appreciate you guys spending time out of your day to watch these videos. Tomorrow, or actually later today, we will have a tight end video talking about my top 12 tight ends, so please check that out. It's been pretty difficult for me this week to do everything. I got a busted hand. I had like a procedure on it, and it literally hurts to type and or click any buttons. So I've been pretty slow to get everything out, but I appreciate you guys being patient and everything. So thank you. Until tomorrow, we'll figure out what we're doing then. But as of right now, check out that tight end video. I appreciate you guys spending your time. And until next time, I'll see you guys. Peace.